It might be frustrating in confession when a priest says, I need to hear your sins, not your stories. And maybe you're wondering why he spent 15 minutes with one soul and only 5 minutes with you. So today we're going to talk about frequent confession, spiritual direction, and advice in the confessional, and how to overcome venial sins, and how Father Benedict Baur's book, Frequent Confession, Its Place in the Spiritual Life, can also be another source of advice outside of the confessional, as well as how to go to confession better. Hello there, and welcome back. I'm Father Nathan Mudd of the Fathers of Mercy and chaplain at the National Shrine of Our Lady of Champion, where Mary appeared in 1859. We're here for part 2 of our 8-part series on frequent confession, and this part is Living a Spiritual Life. The first part of today's section from the book is on frequent confession and spiritual direction, because there's sometimes a lot of confusion about what those two should be and how they should work. Some people seem to expect a lot of advice and counseling and spiritual direction in the confessional, and certainly the confessional is one of the primary places for spiritual direction, but then other people just expect their sins to be absolved and to walk out. So our author, Father Benedict Baur, talks about this a little bit and how there's a difference, and we too can apply some difference as well in advice given in the confessional, pastoral counseling, and spiritual direction. So, what do I mean by advice? Advice is, first of all, a thing that the priest might say in particular to something that you've particularly confessed, a sin that you mentioned that day, and he'll tell you, here's some advice on how to overcome it. Here's the virtue opposite it that you want to grow in. And usually that'll just take a few minutes. And that's pretty good. Actually, that's one of the best pieces for frequent confession, usually what we should expect. Pastoral counseling is a different thing. Sometimes people bring into the confessional a lot of family drama. Problems in their relationships, mental health issues, trauma that they've suffered. And these are things that a counselor or a therapist or somebody with some more training in psychology might be able to handle really well, especially there's some really good Catholic psychologists out there. Usually those questions have to deal with pastoral counseling and might require more discussion outside of the confession in order to reach a satisfactory solution to somebody's problems, or at least help them figure out ways to deal with it. And the confessional isn't really the place for that to happen, mostly because confession is about the forgiveness of sin and healing of the soul. Certainly, these things can be brought up in the confessional and receive God's healing grace and mercy. But at the same time, we shouldn't be frustrated if the priest says, I need sins, not stories, or maybe tells you, why don't you take everything that you're telling me, this story about these things that have happened, maybe they're good things, maybe they're tragic things, and go tell that to Jesus the way you've been telling me. Because right now, confession isn't about that per se. The counsel or healing that you're looking for with some of these bigger issues can be better addressed outside of the confessional, either with the priest when he has more time to be able to address it well and dig deeper into what's going on, or even with a professional who shares the faith or at least some aspect of it who can also help too. Finally, spiritual direction in the confessional. So our author takes a really interesting thing about spiritual direction. A lot of people approach spiritual direction as, I'm going to tell the priest all about my life and he's going to help tell me what to do with it. But St. Alphonsus Liguori says in his Praxis for Confessors, in his book on Confessors, spiritual direction deals with the mortification going on in someone's life and helping them discern what to do with that. Spiritual director helps with the manner and frequency with which you receive the sacraments and helping the soul discern how to do that well. It can also help with the practice of virtue, with living a life of prayer and discerning what's going on with grace and prayer, and as well as how to sanctify daily life. This is why, in my opinion, St. Josemaria Escriva was one of the best spiritual directors and has great things on spiritual direction. But I'm probably prejudiced because my spiritual director came from Opus Dei as well. One of the other things our author points out about spiritual direction, and some of the saints do and some other spiritual writers do as well, is that there's a lot of direction provided even by a rule of life. And so first of all, they're looking at clergy and religious who have rules of life that they follow in order to maintain a spiritual life and connection with God. The same sort of thing can apply to laity as well. And this is why all of the saints, St. Francis de Sales, St. Josemaria Escriva, St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Teresa of Avila, they talk about having a plan of life, a sort of disciplined schedule for prayer and for when you know things are going to get done. This is one of the first things to do in stepping into a spiritual life, and a confessor can help you with that. But we shouldn't expect when we go into the confessional that we're going to spend 20 minutes getting direction for all the little things in our life that we're doing and help with making a plan of life and getting deep into spiritual experiences in prayer. Oftentimes, we just don't have the time in the confessional to address those things well. And once again, it's good to make an appointment with a priest or a spiritual director to talk about those things outside of the confessional, where they can be addressed well, where more personal advice can be given, and maybe where a relationship can begin to form between the directee and the director so that they know who they're talking to. The second part of what we're covering today is overcoming deliberate venial sin. So our author addresses those venial sins that we commit deliberately, those things that we might say, well, I mean, at least I could still go to Holy Communion even if I do this. It's like a kid poking his sister in the back of the car. He's doing it deliberately. It's not a mortal sin, it's a venial sin. It's annoying, it's still bad, and he should stop. So how do we overcome these deliberate venial sins? Our author takes us through 2 points. He says, first of all, we should look at the order of venial sins and how we're going to overcome them. We should look at seriousness. Which ones are more serious in terms of, is there a deliberate venial sin that we do more frequently? Maybe every day we tell a little white lie about why we arrived 5 minutes late to work. That's a deliberate venial sin. Let's work on that. Maybe it's something that's causing annoyance. Maybe it's annoyance to ourselves. Maybe we never go to bed on time and we're constantly aggravated that we're staying up too late. It's a deliberate venial sin we need to overcome. Or maybe it causes annoyance to somebody else. That can also put it higher up there in seriousness. We want to overcome those deliberate venial sins which hurt others too. Does it come from weakness, or does it betray some weakness on our part? Is another thing that could put it up in seriousness. Like I said, going to bed early or getting up late. There's a weakness on our part that needs to be overcome. Also, we should also try to overcome the more exterior venial sins before the interior venial sins, according to our author, mostly because they're more noticeable and can be that cause of scandal to others who see us. Secondly, our author addresses the means of overcoming deliberate venial sin. And he says we should always focus on the positive means first. Yes, do mortification, do penance, offer things up, give things up in order to overcome them. Absolutely. But positively means first praying for grace, asking the Lord in prayer in the morning, maybe with your morning prayer, in the afternoon with maybe a midday examination of conscience, and in the evening, Lord, give me the grace to overcome this sin, whatever it might be. And then, two, to remember some things as well, to kind of keep them in mind. Things like there are no little things in the eyes of God, right? And we know this. St. Therese says if somebody picks up a needle even in the hallway with great love, it can make them a saint. It's a holy act. Little things done with great love can make us holy, and in the same way, little sins done deliberately can also drag us down, increase that drag on our souls. So there are no little things in the eyes of God, be they venial sins or be they the good things that we do. Also, don't say to yourself, well, even if I do this, I can still go to communion. That's not how the saints talk. Saints say, no, I won't do this because I love God, and God looks upon this with displeasure. Finally, fighting temptations. And the positive means to fighting temptations to these deliberate venial sins is by turning them into opportunities for prayer. So let's say that you're confronted with temptations in your thoughts, and the devil's like pushing some thoughts on you, maybe with something that you've seen or something that you've heard. Maybe you want to be judgmental of somebody, or maybe there's a temptation to impure thought there. These are opportunities to turn them into prayers. Lord, help me to be chaste in my thought, word, and action. Lord, help me to be patient. Lord, help me to overcome these sins. And every time we take that temptation and make it a prayer. Finally, and most essentially, of course, is to increase in our love of God, to grow in how we approach the Lord and love him. Frequent confession helps with this, of course, by removing obstacles to that love, but we should always be reminding ourselves, why am I doing this? Why do I want to get rid of this sin? Why do I want to stop lying? Because I want to love God more. The third section of our reading is sins of frailty. Now, these are often not talked about in examinations of conscience. You won't often see them in some of the Catholic spiritual reading that addresses mortal sins and bigger sins. These are sins that advanced souls are committing. When they're no longer doing deliberate venial sins, when they're no longer doing mortal sins, falling very rarely into deliberate sin, these are sins, these sins of frailty, caused by weakness and thoughtlessness. So let's talk about thoughtlessness first. Sins caused by thoughtlessness are those that we jump into without thinking about them ahead of time, whether this be impetuosity, whether this be want of reflection, where something happens and maybe we say something or think something without having thought about it first. And these could be sins of judgment, being overly critical towards somebody. This could be idle. This could also be idle speech and talking loosely without thinking about what we're saying beforehand. This could be maybe just being too busy to give our full attention to something and treating somebody or something poorly when it deserves more of our attention. So those are sins of thoughtlessness, but they're not deliberate. They just happen to us, and we think about it afterwards or in the moment and go, why did I do that? Secondly, sins that come from weakness of the will. And this is where our will gets sort of carried away by passions or feelings in the moment. Maybe somebody says something, we respond with sarcasm or respond bitterly. Or, well, you didn't put that in the right place. Well, you weren't put in the right place. We don't say things like that, right? We don't want to give in to that weakness of will, but maybe we're in a bad mood. Maybe we're being overly touchy for whatever reason, and we're just letting ourselves be carried away by our feelings. And remember, as soon as we say that, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that way or to you in that manner. Sometimes this can even be just seeking out extra comfort at the expense of others. This is weakness of will, giving over to our feelings instead of making good decisions. And while we're overcoming or want to overcome these sins of frailty, they can actually be beneficial to us in 3 ways. So, first of all, they help us grow in humility. Every time that we fall by thoughtlessness or weakness into one of these sins of frailty, we remember that, oh, that's right, Lord, I am not perfect yet. Secondly, and this is the other side of that coin, it reminds us of our dependency on God for our sanctity. Lord, I'm entirely dependent on you in order to become holy. You're going to remind me at those times when I need to pay more attention with my thought, when I need to overcome my feelings in the moment with an act of the will. And thirdly, they're reminders to us of prayer. As soon as we realize that a sin of thoughtlessness has popped out, maybe we accidentally use the name of God in vain because we hear it so much, we immediately turn to prayer and tell the Lord, Lord, I am sorry for having used your name in vain. I want to make reparation for that sin and all of those times that others use it in vain as well. But it is primarily love of God that dries up these sins of frailty, that overcomes it. The more we fall in love of God and the more we are drawn closer to him with love and desire for him, the less we'll fall into those because our thoughtfulness will increase and just our fundamental attitude and governance of our passions will get better as well. There's a danger at the same time in this part of the spiritual life is that somebody might say, well, I'm not doing deliberate venial sins anymore, and I'm almost never doing mortal sin anymore. That never happens. So I just keep going to confession and communion, and everything's good. And our author talks about this. These are sort of quote-unquote pious people who do damage to the faith by their touchiness, by their moodiness, by all the little things, sins of frailty, that they refuse to work on. I think about this a lot when it comes to being passive-aggressive. It's something very easy to say, well, I wasn't mean to that person. Well, maybe you were mean to that person. You just weren't paying attention to how you were mean to that person. And that's where getting rid of the thoughtlessness and the weakness of will by the love of God and love of neighbor can help us overcome a lackadaisical attitude to those sins of frailty. The fourth part of our reading is the life of prayer. And in here, our author talks about what it takes to pray always. He says Christ, in the Blessed Sacrament, present in all the tabernacles throughout the world, is always present, praying for us before God the Father as our eternal high priest. Christ's prayer is constant, and he's never distracted from it. However, we get distracted in our prayer, right? And so our author makes the point that a life of prayer doesn't mean that we're constantly walking around praying hundreds of rosaries every minute of the day. He says you can't do that and live a life of love and sanctity and serving others in the work of the Lord. So he talks about making a fundamental attitude of righteousness, of always wanting to choose the good, of always talking to God mentally, and always offering up things to him constantly. So this is why we start our mornings with the morning offering, right? And we dedicate the whole day and everything that we do, our joys and our sufferings, to the Lord, already putting our day in that context of prayer. Doing this gives us a supernatural outlook where everything that goes on during our day, the stuff that we encounter, the people we encounter, the situations we find ourselves in, we approach them with a supernatural outlook. Not just in terms of this world and its fallenness and the pain and distractions of it and even its joys, but looking towards heaven and towards what God is trying to do in our lives and with what we are encountering. We approach them with this newer supernatural outlook because we're talking to God in prayer. Father Garrigou-Lagrange, a spiritual writer of the 20th century, said everybody has an interior conversation going on in their head. And there's always, it's one of two partners. It's either with yourself or with God. And a great sign of increasing in holiness, if you want to know, well, am I getting better or not, is to ask, who do I talk to more in my head? Do I talk to myself more or do I talk to the Lord? The more that we talk to God in that interior conversation, as we make disciplined times for meditation, for our vocal prayer, as we carry out our daily devotions, the easier it becomes for God to become that interior partner and constant partner in prayer. And the other thing about having a newer life of prayer from frequent confession is that we'll find ourselves telling our stories to Jesus more often. And frequent confession will become more about those sins and receiving that grace from the sacrament instead of just telling stories and about what happened in our days and weeks and months since our last confession, because we'll have been constantly talking to God about that. And we'll find ourselves needing less advice from the priest because we'll have been receiving more graces from God to grow out of those sins in the practice of virtue and become better sons and daughters of God in all the aspects of our life. Thank you so much for watching. We hope that you'll return to watch the 6 more parts of this class that we have left. Please subscribe so that you don't miss any of those. And if you haven't already visited the National Shrine of Our Lady of Champion, we would love to welcome you to where Mary appeared in Wisconsin. God bless you all. Keep me in your prayers, and I will keep you in mine.